Thank you, James. Namaste. Let me make a little correction. I was a psychiatrist, but having realized the limitations of psychiatry that I had studied in the medical school, I have entered into what may be broadly called as the spiritual approach, the spiritual way of life. But actually, it is not an approach or way as we understand, because approach and way is still when we are trying to reach somewhere. It is a change of consciousness. If we really talk about spirituality in the true sense, so there is a state of consciousness in which we are bound by certain habitual reactions of the mind, the vital, the senses, the body. Nature has drawn a magic circle, and within which we act and react like a monkey, whom he acts according to the Madari, the person who makes the monkey jump. I don't know what it's called in English, the monkey man, the trainer. But there is another state of consciousness where we are no more the monkey, and we are freed from the habitual reactions of mind and heart and vital and the senses and the physical nature. And there is a third step after we are free, that we can give a very different reaction to the same event. And there is a fourth step where not only we give a different reaction to the same event, where we even perceive it very differently, which is what transformation is about. So the first is where we are completely bound, and over a period of time, nature has evolved certain mechanisms, which includes the experience of grief and pain. It is if we go to its deepest sense, it is a kind of maybe illusion may sound a very harsh word, but ultimately it is because of the way we perceive reality. So when something vanishes in front of our eyes forever, but the memories remain, we use the word grief. Take an example that when someone goes abroad, earlier, nowadays the travels have become very easy, but earlier, in long time back, when people went abroad on a steamer ship for maybe years, they were gone, and there were no mobiles to track or anything. So during those days, when people returned back, for a long time there was very little communication. The communication was through letters and everything, but there was no such sense of grief or loss, because human beings were, those who were left behind knew that there is going to be a return. This knowledge itself was a great knowledge to help us. Now, why I'm saying so is because some time back, mother's great granddaughter made a very interesting observation. Not great granddaughter, her granddaughter. So she was sharing this thing with me, and she was saying that, what, I have seen something very interesting about one of the differences I see in India and the Western context is how people react when when people die. So I asked her, what is your observation? She said, in India, somehow when people die, that kind of sense of grief is not there, as she has observed in the Western context. Now, I don't know about what is observed in the Western context, but she explained very beautifully. She said, because there is this belief in rebirth. So it is something so similar to the fact that somebody is gone on a journey and the person is going to come back. Now, even if you do not see, even if you have left your body, but you don't die with this idea that the person will not come back, the person will come back. He is not lost forever. Whereas on the other hand, there is another state in which we think the person is lost forever. Of course, there is this idea of the last judgment. Someday, when everybody will rise from the grave or wherever they are, and there will be a judgment. But that is a different thing altogether. So this kind of a idea, this kind of a knowledge, it helps a lot when we deal with things. So the senses feel the loss because the senses have limits. It's like somebody who has traveled abroad and you're hardly in communication. But the mind remembers. So very often it has been seen, it's a very interesting phenomena, that sometimes even when somebody has gone away, and it's very interesting to see this phenomena, I have observed it as a psychiatrist number of times, that sometimes people go into a reverie and instead of grief, paradoxically, they give a response as if the person is present. There is even a smile. And we, in conventional psychiatry, is taught that you shake them up, they must cry. But the word used is denial. Now, it's not really denial. Its senses have one way of experiencing things. But the mind has another way of experiencing the same reality. The person exists in some state of memory and you can bring out a different kind of response. And this is very useful in therapy, because what do we really do in therapy when somebody has gone away because somebody has been lost either because of death or because of separation due to various reasons. So there are two responses we can give. One is the response of pain, sometimes bitterness. Paradoxically, even after going away, I remember a couple who lived together for 60 years. They were like inseparable and always together. And after this man died, so I was asked to break this news to the lady, because she used to be quite a difficult person. So probably they felt I'm a little more difficult person, so I could break the news. So I went and explained to her that, he is now with mother. She looked at me for a while. Then she started left and right, all the choicest words about that man. How dare he go away without telling me, leaving me behind? So now what happens is, it's not the person, but what the person represents to me. He was like a constant companion. So when the person is gone, it's not just the person which is gone, but the companion who is gone. Now, this is where we have to understand that each person represents in our life something of some value, and it is this that we miss. For instance, a rich man's husband, a rich woman's husband, let me put the analogy a different way, who is only eyeing on her money, will feel the loss of money when she goes away. It's not so much love, and you may see him weeping. But it's because suddenly there is this loss event. So it's the value of a person. But another person who loves a lot will feel the loss of something in the emotions. So there is a representation that each person has in our life, and it is that which we miss. So let's go back to the origin. What is the person representing? A value. Now, what is this value? This value may be in terms of money. This value may be in terms of emotions. This value may be in terms of friendship, etc., etc. So what is the way out? The way out is that we understand that all these are representations. In reality, that's how the spiritual consciousness works. There is only one who is the true friend, the eternal friend, the companion, the husband, wife, child, parents, and every other figure we can imagine. Even an enemy. Some people miss even their enemies. So when we start living in this way, then we understand that though the image has been withdrawn, but the person continues to exist, the one person who has assumed all these figures. This is where spiritual consciousness takes us, and this state is called one and oneness. Now, many people, when they think about one, they feel all this is annulled. That means, oh, all this is an illusion. No, that's not what it means. It means that each person is a figure of something else, that which transcends it and uses it. Like on a computer screen, you have icons. Now, icon is only a representation of something else. Through the icon, you can enter into some window or some other, whatever files are there. So each person in a life represents, in our ignorance, something of the divine reality, but we are not ready to behold. Therefore, that person is, there is a whole play in which we are trained and taught to, experience life in a certain way. But then, because all these persons, all these figures are temporary and transient, therefore we are driven to seek the permanent and not be happy only with the transient. So if we look at it like this, from the state of consciousness in which currently we dwell, a limited state of consciousness, grief and loss are a reminder that the happiness that we enjoy, the companionship that we enjoy are imperfect and of a temporary nature. Now, there are two conclusions one may draw from this. One is that all this is transient and temporary, therefore leave it only in search of the permanent. That is the Buddha's solution. But the other is the Jivan Mukta, Shri Krishna's solution, that live amongst everything and everybody, deal with everyone, but know that each person is a role playing by the one. The person whom we call as wife, husband, lover, friend, beloved, they are all ways through which the one reality is trying to reach out to us, because we are so small and limited that we cannot directly comprehend that reality. So he's reaching out to us in these ways which is more approachable. Because if it were to come to us as it is, we would not be able to behold it. See, that's what we see in the Gita, in that grand vision, one of the most liberating chapters. If somebody is struck with grief and loss, of course, whole of Savitri is wonderful. But before Savitri, if there is any other scripture which suddenly liberates you, is chapter 11 of the Gita. Because Arjuna asks the same question, you are my friend, but who are you? Do I really know you? And he shows the Vishwarupa. Now, this is true of every relationship. Incidentally, though there it's the avatar, so he could manifest himself fully. Is it not true that each one is the divine wearing a human guise? That's how, when mother was asked that, who am I? She said, the divine in many disguises. So when we deal with this world of name and form, we think that disguise is the permanent thing, the real thing, then we are disappointed. Because it's still made up of stuff which is temporary, transient, imperfect. The mold is imperfect. So we deal thinking that deep inside there is that essence which is perfect, but we are involved only with the disguise. But disguises fall away with time. And frankly, it is a wonderful thing to happen. That's why grief comes to remind us. Pain is the hammer of the gods to break a dead resistance in the human heart. If the heart were not forced to want and weep, his soul would have lain down content and ease, and never learned to climb towards the sun, and never learned to exceed the human start. So if we look at nature's mechanism, it is so beautiful. I mean, beautiful in the sense that everything is inbuilt within it to help us grow in consciousness and arrive at that point where we are meant to be. So grief and pain or losses are a reminder to find the one who doesn't, who is not subject to death, who is immutable, who is perfect. This is the first step. And unless we do that, whatever attitudes we may take, whatever belief systems we may take, the heart and these senses are going to suffer. The mind can to an extent conjure things. Now let's take about the heart. We miss a person and we, when a person whom we have loved and has gone away. Now what do we really miss? What is it that, is it for the person that we are having grief, or is it because of ourselves? If we really look at very closely, we will see that it is because of ourselves that we feel the pain. After all, the person, whether we believe in a rational thought which doesn't believe in God, wherever he is, or if at all he is, if it was dust or matter, he is gone. He is at rest. R.I.P. If we believe in soul, the person is again in a onward journey. So if we really love somebody, what should be our attitude? It is love not for my sake, but love for the beloved's sake. He is happy on his journey. So who are we and why should we try to pull him back into this stuff of imperfection when he has decided to leave? So if we really closely look at the phenomena, even just reflect a little, then we realize that we grieve for those who have gone away from our lives, not because of them. People often say, the person has gone away. It's not that person whom we should worry about. It's those who are left behind. And why? Because they have invested all their emotions, all their feelings into a bank which is going to crash. When you invest in certain shares, it's written below, they are subject to market risk. Now, human body and human life, don't we all know it is something perishable, it is something which is going to go away? Now, if we invest all our emotion into that, suddenly when the person goes away, What we discover within us is an empty space, and that empty space is called abyss. See, it's like a room where we have filled up objects or something, and when the object breaks away, then we suddenly find the whole room is empty. So, when a person goes away, one of the common experiences in life is the sense of emptiness. So, how do people normally fill this emptiness? The advice is become busy. So, people get busy with work, they get busy with 100 things, they get busy with relationships. Okay, that person is gone, some days grief is enough now, find somebody else. Now what happens in the process is that we are subjecting ourselves to the same problem is not resolved, because this too will collapse into the abyss can never be filled with any human being or object or anything which is transient and perishable. So, how can this abyss be filled? And this abyss is constantly longing. See, for a while we have a person in our life and we feel we are happy and satisfied. But this abyss will long for more. It is the original inconscient base. It is infinite. It will long for more. So, when it longs for more, even when the person is present, you will feel the loss, you will feel the pain. And worse still, because the person is there with you and you can do nothing about it. See, this is what in life, this is the real time tragedies which take place. The lover is there, but the love is gone. It's a worse situation to be in. So, given these things, what is the solution really? It is only when we understand that only and only the divine love, it can fill the abyss. Human love is a distorted reflection. It's the same thing, but distorted. So it can never fill the sacred thirst. It can never fill the infinity that that longs and cries and craves for someone. It can only be filled with the divine love. So what is the way out? Should we leave the world and only turn toward the divine? Well, some people do it. Bhaktas do it. Today I was watching sometimes these interviews of sadhus, sannyasis. So how do they manage life? So they kill their senses, they kill their emotions, they kill everything, and they say they turn exclusively to God, so they don't feel pain and grief. That is not the way, at least in the yoga of transformation, and that gives a lie to creation itself. So what is the way? To love everybody and everything by searching the divine principle inside, by looking upon everybody as the divine in a human guise. It's a difficult thing to do, because sometimes human ego will come in between. The person will say things, do things which you may not like. Well, in real life, even divine does things which we may not like. So if it's a very good training for us, that yes, but still we continue to love. So this is how one uses life as a means to go deeper and discover that true principle. Same thing happens with every object. Every object that we use, gives us a certain joy, is taken away from us. Now, when we have understood that it's not the object that gives joy, it's the way the mind values it. There's a very nice little story about a empress. She, her wonderful mirror, very expensive mirror, got broken because a maid was mishandling it. And the maid comes and says, "Oh Empress, I'm so sorry, I'm afraid the mirror from China is broken." And now she is ready for the punishment. So the Empress looks at her, sees a deeply spiritually wise woman. And then she says, "Very good, the object that was flattering my vanity has been broken." So it's the way we look at things. Now, this way we look at things is very easy to say, but it doesn't come naturally to mind. It comes through sustained practice. That's why it's very easy to give such advices, but very difficult. Why? Because it's only if we live life in a certain way that we can handle these moments. It's not like when there is a loss event, suddenly I can become deeply spiritual. I know of a person, even reading a literature doesn't help us. I know of a good friend, God bless him, his grandfather, when he was on deathbed. So suddenly this man went there and gave him an advice that, "Dadaji, why are you so much afraid of death? You have been reading the Gita. What is there to feel afraid about it?" So the Dadaji looked into his eyes, said nothing. Ultimately he died. So this man was describing me that same night his Dadaji came into his dream. And he felt a searing pain in the heart region. Tremendous pain, as if somebody was cutting off the strings of the heart. And this Dadaji knows what he's experiencing. So Dadaji tells him, grandfather tells him, so now you know what is the pain of death? He got up with sweat all over. He described to me this experience. He got up with sweat all over, full of terror and fear. And then he got up and just to relax himself, he randomly pulled one of the books of Sri Aurobindo on the Upanishads, randomly opened a page, and there it was written that the self, the soul is tied with 101 strings to the body. It is this when it is detached that we experience the pain of death. So this is a real phenomena. So what is the solution? The mother says very beautifully, live a life with a certain degree of detachment. You can't have the cake and eat it too. You can't lead a life which is full of deep attachment and, life of ignorance. Suddenly, when there is a pain because something has been snatched away, we curse God or complain God. Actually, that is a grace to remind us. So it's always good in life to keep the tadka of detachment always ready. And the way to practice is to always step back and look at all the phenomena and appearances. They will come and go. It's one of the simple exercises, two simple exercises is in Pondicherry, it's very easy, but one can do in mind's imagination. Look at the ocean. Look at the rolling waves. They come and go, yet they seem the same. You can't make a difference. So in life, things come and go, and yet they look the same. But what is the deeper truth we must remember is not the waves, but the ocean. That's where we must tap into. In everything, with everything we should be there. The second thing which helps us is the vastness of the creation. When our life is focused on one small object, which we have made everything, some people unfortunately make one human being or make one thing the whole object around which they dance. And naturally, when it is taken away, the life crashes. But when you look at the sky, there are countless stars all the time appearing and disappearing. We don't even get to know. The total picture, the larger picture is ever so beautiful. So always to remain connected with the larger picture. And for that, we have to learn not to be glued to the scene, which means less of television, less of WhatsApp. All the time, this impulse, the moment there is WhatsApp, any video anybody sends, you have to click and see. Why? Is it really necessary? If you want to put a like, don't want to disappoint him, or simple thing, put a namaste. Let the person wonder, whatever it means, whether it's a like, dislike, or ambiguous. So, but it's not necessary. Pick and choose what one wants to see. Same thing with the screen. Now, you see the power, it can be so powerful when we are completely attached to the phenomena. So, a lot of people during all this Corona episode, now also they ask, what are your views about Corona and all this and that and, vaccination, all this. So, I ask them, is this the first time human beings are dying on earth? I mean, is it that death is taking place for the first time? The story of Buddha, when someone went to Buddha and asked him, Buddha, are you God? He said, well, if you believe so. So he said, then can you make the dead come to life? He said, well, if you believe so. He said, then please, somebody has died in my family, so can you do it for me? He said, very simple, go to, just gather 5 grains of rice. He wanted to go, wait. Go to 5 different houses, gather 5 grains of rice, but the house must be one where nobody has ever died in their families. Obviously, it's not. It's a reality which we must understand that, So how can we be prepared for it? Simply by knowing that while all these supports which are perishable in life, don't lean upon them for, it's like we play a role in a particular life, and then when the whole thing is gone, there is a beautiful poem of Sri Aurobindo. What is this talk of slayer and the slain? So he describes it very beautifully that when there is a scene which is going on, and then when the scene is over, somebody has died, somebody has survived, then they take deep lunged relief, and both of them get up and shake hands. And then they are very happy that, they meet together. So the breaking up of the form and the figure is not the breaking up of realities which cannot be broken. So while we engage through form and figure, because that's what is given to us, yet we must know that that which dwells in the form and the figure is He. So always we have to reorient ourselves till the very consciousness is changed in such a way. This is a passage. One is a passage where there is no he, there is no she, there is no it, only the form and figure. So there are people who live by they Atma Bodh, for whom the person is only the mask they think is person, but it's a persona. That's how the word person comes. Persona literally means a mask. So they are attracted and drawn to the outer mask. And when the mask degenerates or goes away, then itself for them it's a loss. It's a loss of, whatever what they had imagined the person to be. But there are others who link with the person, and not the persona is only a conduit. It's like the body and the form. There are means to contact the deeper reality. Even in human relationship, the same thing applies. The form has an importance because we cannot directly perceive that reality. It's tremendous. So, but we must know that this form through which I am engaged with is a means for me to touch that reality. And when we look at it like this, then we discover in life all the people we meet, all the manifold relationships are nothing but aspects of ourselves and aspects of the One. Each person brings out something from within ourselves. If you really look closely, with different people, we have different selves which come out. And hardly anyone with whom our deepest self comes out. And where the deepest self comes out, that is going to last. It doesn't depend upon the presence or going away of the form. But all these aspects ultimately are also aspects of the one divine. So they need to be also changed into that equivalent. So ultimately the secret lies in arriving at that state where there is one and oneness. Tatra ko moha ka shoka ekatvam anupashyata. This is the spiritual way. And what is this journey which takes us there? To live with this consciousness, with this not just attitude. Attitude is still like, still not exactly belief system, but it is still something like of the mind. But to live with this consciousness, with this reflection, with this meditation, that within every different, ever moving, ever transient, ever changing world, there dwells the one. Isha, the same Upanishad starts with that. Isha vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tatra ko moha tena tyaktena bhunjita magrida kasya siddhanam. So many times, to make it more clear, Sri Aurobindo used to walk and meditate in the jail. So many people take it that one of the ways is to walk and meditate. Now what it means is very symbolic. It means to walk through life and meditate. I look at it like that. It's not just walking as a physical exercise. Walk through life. Many appearances, many things will come and go. But stay in this idea, this deep thing should be always in the background, running constantly. That all these are not just illusory appearances, but they hold a much deeper reality. And try to come in contact with that. Try to come in contact with that. And every person is a means, wonderful means given to us to come in contact with the deeper reality. Every relationship is a means to get the ego chipped off. And then if we live with this reality, then when the person goes away, then we'll not grieve. Actually, paradoxically, we'll be happy for that person that now he is transiting and taking a leap towards the future. Because we never connected with that person for our own benefit or advantage. We were all the time thinking the good of that person all the time in our mind. That is the difference between, Arjuna and Karna. Karna has not the fortune of the Gita. So Karna fights the war to prove a point. I am greater than Arjuna. But when Arjuna fights, Sri Krishna tells him on one side, ahimsa should have a non-violent state. Don't hate, don't have wrath. But he also reminds everybody that these souls are right now in the darkened state of body. When they are freed from it, they are also on a upward journey. I am not saying that start seeing darkened souls, take a sword and life has evolved differently. And yeah, it's a good thing that life has evolved like that. But but even in war it is still like that. There is no personal enmity, but people do fire and kill because one understand that it's not about that, you are that person. It's about a certain form playing a certain role. So live life knowing that we are all playing a certain role, and for each role we must try to tune ourselves to perfection, as if we have to, we can't play God, but in a certain sense we have to play the role as perfectly as the divine would play it. For instance, if one is a father, have infinite patience. If you are a mother, have infinite love. If you are a, I don't know, divine plays the role of a husband. If you are a husband, maybe this is the only relation where husband and wife, where divine has nothing much to say, but still. Of course, Ishvara and Ishwari, but if they are not married, they are like eternal lover and beloved. If you are a lover, love beyond the reach of time. That's how one should love. And if you are a beloved, the same applies. So for each relationship, if you are a friend, stand by the friend through good and bad days. But it doesn't mean follow whatever your friend wants you to do. Stand by the friend, but never deviating from dharma. So in every relationship to play, like the divine, he will never bend down to our caprices. If you tell the divine, punish that person, he's not going to punish that person because you are asking him and he is omnipotent God. He'll never do that. He'll teach you the way which is right, and right from the higher standpoint. So each of the different roles in which we find ourselves, we must understand we have to tune into the divine truth. And there are so many stories, there are whole approaches through which we can arrive at that. So to come to the end of the whole thing before we have questions, essentially what we all need is a change of consciousness. The mother puts it very beautifully in one of her conversations. She notes anecdotes. She says that she met a mystic in France, and I suspect it is Inayat Khan. I have my reasons to believe that Inayat Khan, the famous, the person who could sing, and he was a mystic. He came later to ashram also, and he wanted to sing for Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo was in his room while he sang in the courtyard. So Inayat Khan, when she met that mystic. So that mystic confirmed something which she herself knew. So he said, what we say in mysticism, do not wash the stains from the sheet one by one, but change the whole sheet. This is the difference. What we do is, each time we are attacked by grief, we wash it off. So get busy, play, do something, get involved with work. So you have washed that stain. Have you really washed? No, it is there. That possibility remains. So one grief should be enough to overcome that entire possibility. But we, unfortunately, as human beings, are very poor learners. We need several experiences to learn just one simple lesson of life. And what that lesson is, Sri Aurobindo beautifully says in one of his letters, it is the lesson of life that everything fails a man except the divine if he turns to him. And then he says, blows do not come to you because there is something bad in you. When somebody loses someone, you say, oh, this is some sin or something. When you lose, then it is some weird theory of karma. But when the other person, it is sin. When you lose, it is will of God. But somebody else, it is sin. So he says, blows come to all human beings. Who is there who doesn't experience these things? There's a birth of Savitri when to Rishi Markandeya, Yudhishthira asked, is there anybody in this world who has been so righteous as Draupadi and suffered like her? And then he says, yes, in far back time there was one virtuous as Draupadi and suffered much more, but she conquered it. And that's how the legend of Savitri is born. So he says blows come to all human beings, not because there is something bad in us, but because we are attached to things that are by their very nature transient and cannot last. Does it need spiritual books to understand this? Many of these things are everyday common sense experience of life. And if we don't yet see it, then we don't really see. It's true that things don't last. We somehow try to, ragtag manage them, but they don't last. Why they don't last? The last word. Because they are not rooted in the eternal. If we want anything to last, whether it be relationship or anything, loss events, grief particularly, relates to relationships, any kind of relationships. Root it in the eternal. And when we root it in the eternal, then after the physical form is gone, we can still contact. And to root a relationship in the eternal, the first condition is to be ourselves rooted in the eternal. If we are ourselves attached to this outer name and form, I am Dr. So and so. Have you noted that? See my visiting card. I am Professor Emeritus. All this is nonsense. If we really live like that, then it's meaningless to speak about such things. So we must know ourselves, who we really are. We are the eternal in a human disguise. We are not, as Teilhard de Chardin said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. So when we look at life like that, so wonderful. So we have to discover that space within. Mother says, there is a very beautiful passage. It's there in Collected Works of the Mother, Volume 2. Those who want to refer it later on, it is about to know how to suffer. Have the laptop, so we can take it out and read. With that we can end. She says that to know how to suffer, in Volume 2 of Mother's Collected Work, that when there is a sense of loss and grief because people are lost, or those whom we are attached to, she says, dive deep down into yourself. And deep within there is a light that grief cannot cross. It's like no entry. If grief tries to come there, and we all experience it, when there is a psychic state, then really speaking, even if the world were to crumble down, it is untouched. Why? Because it knows the permanence and the eternal truth of things. But the moment you step out, there is the storm where things are constantly changing and moving. When things are changing, by the very fact they are changing, it means they are impermanent. We don't have to, really speaking, read a spiritual book. We are in a world which is ever changing. And if it is ever changing, anityam, then everything is going to change away. But the saving grace is that behind these changing appearances, Isha Vasyamidam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat, there is the eternal, there is the Lord who inhabits all this. To be in contact with Him, to turn to Him when we are experiencing such losses, is really speaking the best and the most beautiful way to emerge. Not only emerge from one loss event, but make it as a catapult to safeguard against all future losses. So just this little line. If at any time a deep sorrow, a searing doubt, or an intense pain overwhelms you and drives you to despair, there is an infallible way to regain calm and peace. In the depths of a being there shines a light whose brilliance is equalled only by its purity. A light, a living and conscious portion of a universal Godhead who animates and nourishes and illumines matter. A powerful and unfailing guide for those who are willing to heed His law. A helper full of solace and loving forbearance towards all who aspire to see and hear and obey Him. So it's not like suddenly we can do it. When Sri Aurobindo was asked that, is it true that when we take the name of God and depart, we go into moksha? He said, yes, but read it with the previous sloka. Therefore, O Arjuna, remember me at all times and fight. You can't lead a life which is just, hanging around here and there. Suddenly, oh, Gita, it was written. You can't even remember. Because the mind will be so attached to all these things. No sincere and lasting aspiration towards Him can be in vain. No strong and respectful trust can be disappointed. No expectation ever deceived. So this is the truth of mystic experience. And everybody who has walked the path knows it. That if we really aspire, it's not far away. It is our mind that has made us believe that God is far. It is our mind that has made us believe that it's a retired man's job. Retired man's job is only to sit in the house and boss over those who are around till they feel tired and sick and say, please, when are you going to go away? It's not a retired man's job. It's a living person's. It needs courage. But what else are we here for? So when we are young, before the shadows of grief come to us, we must know. And as I said, it's logical. It doesn't need to read books to understand that everything is ever changing. Our very body is not the same from childhood till now. What is that? If we just reflect, we will see we are changing. So in young age, I know a person who said, when he had to go for marriage, then he decided, he said, see, other things I don't know, I can't see in a person. So let me marry a woman who is very beautiful. So when I heard this, I said, what a strange way to choose. Because this is for sure not going to last. All other things may last. This is for sure going to fade away. And it ended up split up because, okay, you may not know things inside. It's a gamble, whatever you may say. Go by the love in the heart. But I am not right now going into a marriage bureau, solutions of life. But I'm just saying that when we are driven by appearances, it is going to change. Are we the same that we were as a child? And will be the same when we grow old? Inwardly we don't grow old, but the body ages. So why hang on to these appearances which are not going to, they will change. So the reason is, the thing we have to remember, it therefore evolve. Even in a relationship, evolve. It may start in a certain way, but evolve to a point where two people have discovered the deep essence of love, which is ingrained in the very soul of things. Then one goes, still one is together. And of course, space and time, then no more divide, because one has discovered immortal love that never dies and is never lost. Namaste. I think we can take questions. We have 10 minutes. So, yes, please. Okay, wonderful. If I understand the question right, how to know that, in a relationship when we love someone, whether it is the divine that we love in that person. Is that right? Is that something like that? To an extent, right? So, now basically, of course, when we get into love, not fall into love, but when we get into the experience of love, the movement of love, then of course it may be at any level. It may be at the level of the mind, seeking a companion. It may be at the level of the heart, or whatever level. But since we are by and large, or it can even be at the level of the vital and the physical. Now, what happens with most human beings that's a contact point. It is not the totality of a being. Now, once the initial contact is made and the two people start getting closer and closer, then the different parts that come into play. And that's where the trick lies or the challenge lies. So love seeks completeness. It seeks union, but it's not satisfied with union at one level. Then the ego begins to play a part in that process where the ego feels dissatisfied, it has expectations, it has its own selfish needs. So a lot of people, they love to satisfy a need within. It's like an emotional hunger. Most commonly, it is an emotional hunger that one is, emotionally feels deprived, and it's very happy if somebody comes in the life who can pour feelings of love inside us. Or sometimes it is a vital interchange which one wants, like praises or compliments and things like that. Sometimes it's a mental sharing and a mental companionship. Now, all these kind of love, unless they are upgraded or taken to a deeper level, they are going to wither away in a relationship. Now, if both people are ready, they understand that our, wherever we may have started, we have to upgrade it. And for that, we need a goal beyond the human frame, then it's wonderful. But more often what happens, people want to just they think the end of love is physical union, which means marriage, which means children, which means house. Now, this is a crash landing. The flight has not even taken off. And that's why in most of the places where this happens, olden times, they stayed together because of duty. But now it's no more duty, but beauty. So, things don't last for long. So, because there is no such, social frames are not operating, religious injunctions, nobody believes. And there is a reason why all this has happened. So, people don't stay along together, or if they stay along together, it's with, facade of togetherness because of various reasons. But inwardly, the cracking up has started. Because they missed out on this point that everything on earth must evolve. Everything. This is the law of life on earth. So if the two can be together and they can really together evolve, they must have an aim beyond the human frame. Human frame itself is an ever-evolving truth. So if they have an aim beyond, which means a spiritual aspiration or a deeper psychic state, then there is a full chance for this human love to change into the ways divine. That change means that there will be no more expectations, the egoistic hungers and desires in love, but simply a constant pouring of energies to nourish each other's upward effort. So the two people come together and they join together because they are trying to lift a flame upward towards the heaven. This is something very beautiful, but this is very rare. Most often it is one person who can feel like that, but the other person may not. In that case, the person who has engaged in love and has a higher aspiration should use this as a wonderful means, training ground to prepare for the deepest and highest spiritual life. When Mother was asked that, what do you do when love comes in your life? We are supposed to reject all human love for the sake of divine. So what should we do? She says, go through it. It's the best preparation for spiritual life. But she did not say that because you will be disappointed, you will therefore turn towards God in Vairagya. She didn't say that. She said, you must learn to love selflessly without any expectations. Which means you learn to give. This is a tremendous training. Because all our life we are taught to take, appropriate, whether it be from nature to wrestle. This whole law of life which has been taught to us as competitive survival. This is Hiranyakaship's gospel. We should rather live by Prahlad's gospel. It's not snatching things. It's to learn to give. So in any relationship, if we make it based on giving, if we receive, it is wonderful. But if we don't receive, still we give. Why? Because we are moved by love. And because love moves our heart, love has breathed into us, then we keep on giving at every level, at different levels. Even if the person puts up completely a very difficult, outward personality, still we continue to give. And we give totally without expectations and selfishness. So how will we know we have touched that core? If we follow this path, a point will come where we will touch the core which is divine. Divine love. And the sign will be a state of perpetual happiness and beatitude. The moment we touch this bedrock, then really speaking, all these things that forgive a person and all this will go away. Because there is nobody to forgive. You don't forgive the divine that you came to me wearing this mask. You love because it's your nature to love. You are not loving because of what you will get. It's your nature to love. And destiny has placed you in a certain way with a person or, in different forms of relationship. And all that we know is to give love. Now the problem there is then how do I get my stores replenished? What about my needs? So for my needs, turn to the Divine Mother and she will fill us. So meaning thereby there is a two-way movement. One is we turn to the Divine Mother, the source, and keep receiving love from her. We will receive. If we love her with the deepest heart, we will receive infinitely. And the love that we receive, we send it and transmit it and become a channel for all this in everyday life. All the joys, everything earthly thing is there, but its nature is divine. So it is no more dependent on anything external, on satisfaction of desires or expectations. It doesn't mean there is no joy of togetherness. There is a wonderful joy of togetherness. And if there is a reciprocity at that deeper level, it's wonderful. But even if it is not there, still the love will continue because it's not dependent on any perishable support. So to turn to the divine, to receive love, because deep within one loves the divine, and to turn to the world to give love. That is the secret of living life divinely and loving divinely. The sign is a state of constant peace and joy. So we have to keep working towards it till we arrive at that. It takes time. It's not easy. Because in the beginning, especially in the outer field, ego becomes very active on the surface consciousness. Deep inside, you may tune. But the surface consciousness, sometimes people are lost in small little likes and dislikes, small little habits. So that is the last thing to change. But as long as there is a possibility of even a trace of sadness within us, that means it is not yet touched its divine core. When we touch it, then we will always be in a state of peace and happiness. Love always brings beauty, joy and harmony within the heart that loves. Whether it brings that in other person or not will depend upon the receptivity of that person. So don't gauge with that. But the heart that harbors true love will always be full of peace and joy, beauty and harmony. Yes. Any other question? No, it is a form. The soul is a finite section of the infinite. The only difference is everything finite has the infinite within. But the soul is like a little wave which is all the time conscious of the ocean depths. So it does have a form. The soul has a form. It can be seen if the eyes are accustomed to seeing the soul. But that means detaching from the outer forms in which we are engaged and to try to seek the soul within. Then a time comes when the inner sight may awaken and one can see the soul, which is different from the ghost of, ghost is the vital being. That too has a form but like a fluid forms. But subtly it doesn't have a concrete form as the physical has. That is why the whole drama is taking place in the physical, because physical gives a certain kind of grossness but at the same time concreteness that the subtle elements don't have. The vital being can change appearances. The mental being, if we see it, can be almost like blending towards formless. But the soul is a form. It's a luminous form, always a luminous form. And of course, classically it's described as the size of a thumb. But it's, of course, in the beginning, the soul may be a size of a thumb, but it can be even seen as something much bigger, like a whole fire, a flame, a fire. And if it fuses with a, being from above, it can be seen even as a kind of proper, not exactly a person, but something like that, assuming the form of a person. So the soul does have a form. It's not a formless. Of course, the formless truth is behind everything, in matter, in life, in mind. And of course, the soul also has a formless essence of it. The formless essence is there with regard to the soul is that it is always in a state of peace, surrender, joy and love. So when we contact a human being after departure, and if we don't feel that, state of peace, when we don't feel that state of inner joy, then we can be sure that it's not the soul we have contacted, but either the vital being of that person or maybe the vital being of somebody else who has come conjuring as this person. Because some people try to do that, they believe it will help, so they do automatic writings, plain shit, etc. It's not a good thing because the inner world is very disorienting. If that person comes by chance, then we are actually holding back the journey. And if somebody else comes, then we are just open to fooling and deception. So always it's a good thing to send away. But the moment we come in contact with the soul of anyone, always, however small, there will be the sense of peace and beatitude. The soul of everybody has peace and joy. Even those which have been in darkened bodies, the moment they are liberated, they are in their divine essence. So there is no question of any fear or anything that, the word is used in horror movies, Atma and all that. It's all about the vital being. It has nothing to do with the soul. So it has a form and not like a form that is shown in the movies. What is shown in the movies are all about vital beings, ghosts, apparitions. That's not the soul. Soul is a beautiful little entity, often like a flame. And it's wonderful to come in contact with the soul. Even a premature death, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 20-year-old, the moment one sheds not only the physical but the vital and mental sheaths, the soul is always in a state of joy. It doesn't say, oh my God, what happened to me? What a tragedy. It is impossible for any kind of such grief to touch the soul. It doesn't come there because it's all the time in that state where it knows. It's like a wave which knows the sea fully. So it knows that where is it lapsing back? In the sea from where it will emerge again. So it never experiences grief. It is only the mind, vital of man and physical, that experience grief. The soul is always free from grief. So these stories where, oh, the soul came, it was weeping, all this is sign that we have entered into one of those vital zones, come in contact with some vital beings, whether of the departed or somebody else, and it's not a good foray into these domains. One should just give a nice, beautiful send-off, knowing that this soul, the moment it sheds these sheaths, will be in a state of happiness. And then it will come back for the new adventure, always in a progressive march. It's not going to go back. So that's something very beautiful. Personally, one feels the loss, but there one has to remember the beautiful soul moments. So I often advise that, if somebody has departed, what do you do? Instead of brooding over, all the painful things or the pain and the loss, try to string the beautiful memories. That's the whole idea of a memorial, or, maybe even not an album, which is so much about, but, to recount the beautiful things. Sometimes people who have written, let's say, poetry or beautiful letters, please keep them. They are the soul moments and soul memories. Keep them because they'll be very useful. So turn that departure into now extracting the soul essence of a human being's life. Soul truth of a relationship. It may be few moments, but they are the only moments worth it. All the rest, we went there and we went here and look at the photographs, is going to do nothing but, increase the pain. Yes. Namaste. There is a family of souls. Let me put it like this. It's a very good question. There is a family of souls, which means souls which share a common aspiration. But you know what Khalil Gibran said, and it's so true, mother recounts it, children of the same family are rarely born under the same roof. But it is possible if sometimes it happens. Because there are families, and I know a few with Mother and Shri Aurobindo's context, where there are families where there are number of people who have come together for a certain kind of work. And one can very clearly see that it's not just a physical family, but the family of souls, where they are drawn and born to the same family structure to fulfill their work. It happens sometimes. I know a few families where it happens. But this is not a common event. So, because the soul is here to take experience of the infinite. So if it's born in the same family, then, after a time, it's like cloning carbon copies. It doesn't experience life in all its splendor and, vividness. So somebody who is born in India once, maybe born in Arabia another time, God forbid, or maybe born in France or Greece or Italy and, America or Brazil or whatever, So, because it wants to experience life like that. So, the entire family is being born in all these areas is very rare. But what happens normally is that they do meet. This is not uncommon. That souls which have been together as a family and where there was a deep bond, they will meet sometime. They will cross their paths. For how long? It will depend upon, But sometimes it does happen that the soul is born in the same family. It's not a common event though. It's very often done for comforting. Dadaji ki atma is bachche mein aa gayi hai. The grandfather's soul has come into this child. Okay, don't disturb that, belief. It's a good, people are happy, it's okay. But it'll be hardly any evolution and progression. So it needs to go through a host of experiences. But souls which are deeply connected, psychic bonds, they shared a common aspiration. Things which are rooted in the soul and its aspiration, they are bound to come together and meet. And maybe even journey together if that has been the destiny. What is called a soulmate. Again, not a common thing. Wonderful. Yeah. So when the departed come in our dreams, it may be a real thing or sometimes it can be an imagination. But in the beginning, at least in the first 10, 13 days when the person is transiting, it is not uncommon. And those dreams have a very strange characteristic. You get an experience, on one side, you have the thing that the person is dead. But on the other side, you also wonder that how is the person living. That's the character of these dreams. Whereas much later when they come from memory, there is nothing like imagination in a certain sense because, we are not really imagining to bring a person. So, but Much later, supposing one sees the parent in a dream who has passed away, or somebody whom one loved passed away after a certain time, then this idea doesn't come, oh, but you have passed away, but you are still in my dreams. So when that happens, very often those who have passed away, they come to us in dreams. They normally represent symbolically the nature of that, the symbolic nature of that person, the way it represented in our life. Like parents, if they come, normally it means the old consciousness or the past consciousness. So that's how one has to understand. But in the beginning, first 10, 12 days, sometimes there is a very clear, vivid communication why the person departed. So initially, if the first 10, 12 days, if the dreams come, even up to 1 month, there is a strong possibility that it's very vivid, and one is very surprised that, is he living, or he's supposed to be gone. And that is a sign that it's the real person, probably in the vital sheath. Normally, when the person is moving in the vital sheath, one is close in contact with the earth, and therefore one can come. Sometimes those who have been developed yogis can enter the mental world of human beings and plant thoughts and come in dreams, but that's a very rare phenomena. So, in the first few weeks, quite likely they are real contact with the real person in a vital sheath. But much later, it's just a memory, not imagination, memory, or sometimes a symbolic dream where nature is trying to tell us something. Yes, very good question. Very good. Practical question. Detachment. So detachment. I understood. So detachment vis-a-vis indifference. Detachment is not with a person or a form. Detachment is from the ego's way of connecting. Detachment is from the desire connecting with somebody. So once we understand, then we shift the field of detachment. Normally when we think of detachment, we think that leave the person. Oh, that's the easiest thing to do. Every person who engages in divorce is not detached. He is terribly attached to his ego. Detachment invariably means that I will not connect with this reality, with this object or a human being through the ego and the desired self. It means that I'll connect with the person through my psychic being or a higher spiritual self, or at least, because that is not easy, at least with a deeper motive. That's all. So when we do not attach through the external, for what we can get out of a person, then we are truly detached. It gives us a freedom. And to put it in another way, till we arrive at that big state, the simplest way is that this person who has come in my life, leaving aside the frames and all that social, religious and other frames, he or she has been sent by the divine in my life. And therefore, I must take care in the way the divine would take care. So, that Yagnavalkya's famous saying, one loves the wife not for the sake of the wife, but for the sake of the self. So, instead of loving the person for the little self, which is the ego, we love the person because the person is a representative of the divine and we are just trustees. So when children are there in our life, now when we attach ourselves with the ego and desire, then when the children grow up, we are expecting, now I'll get back. We use children like, those piggy banks, where they will return to us back with interest. And there are some parents who actually say, we have done so much for you, what are you doing for us? We're so crude and vulgar actually, if you ask me. But when we treat them that we are trustees, they like Khalil Gibran again, that they are arrows shot by time, you are just the bow. They have to reach their mark. So when we understand that, then a time comes when they are grown up, we set them free. We tell them, go, conquer this world. Go far and wide into the unseen skies to reach out to your highest goals. And then we are out from there. So that is detachment. Which means that we pour all the love, everything we will do, but we are not wanting something back. We are not expecting a return. We are not engaged through the desire which clings and all the time, So that's where we have to understand the difference. Whereas indifference is, I don't care. Indifference is not at all a good thing. It is one of the ways people practice equanimity. But it's only sometimes some people need to go through that stage. Indifference is a good practice only when you are face to face with people who are all the time accusing you, abusing you, cursing you, insulting you. If you can't love them, difficult, so at least be indifferent. Because you can't use the word detachment there. Obviously, you are detached. A person who is insulting you, you can't be attached to such a person. So you be indifferent. That's a very good practice. Or move out of that zone. But detachment specifically applies to engaging with this creation and this world and people through the ego and the desired self. When we eliminate that, then we love in the true way. In fact, it makes love so beautiful. Because we are no more engaged in this false and artificial way, which is the cause of grief and pain. Namaste. What is it? Hypno.
If the departed parents come in the dream, is there any connection?
Okay, departed parents. Ah. Yeah. Yes, so as I said, if the departed parents, it will be rare that they depart together. But in the beginning, initial phases, when they come in the dreams, that means they are still transiting. And quite naturally, if they are attached to us, they will try get drawn near us, especially if we are remembering them with a sense of loss. So that's why the advice is when people have gone beyond, don't pull them back because they are actually on their onward journey. I mean, it's like, remember old time when people were traveling by train and the parents came and they were crying and giving you food and all that, but actually the child forgets the moment he is the train takes off in 5 minutes time. But it's not a healthy thing. Send off the person with joy and sense of that, okay, we'll miss you, but you go ahead in your journey, it's fine, it's much better. But if they come in the dream, it normally means one is that they are still transiting through the vital world, and if you are a strong personality, they may come seeking help. So in that case, just pray, send them thoughts of love so that their transition is good and peaceful. As such, we should do it. When a person is departed for the next few days, we should, sit together, those who really loved the person, and send thoughts of love, read something and say that, I'm sending this energy to you to make your journey better, smoother. One can read the Gita, the Bible, Savitri in Sri Aurobindo in the mother's context, or simply call God's name, or just send thoughts of love and peace. May your journey be peaceful and transition smooth. But later on, if they come in the dream, then very often it's a symbolic dream. And that symbolic dream is that parents invariably represent the past and the old consciousness. Something that we have to actually remove from our nature. So if parents come, that means the past consciousness. Parents, see, what do we receive from parents? Hereditary things. And these hereditary things are both good and bad. But in language of yoga, it is also called as atavism. Things, a parent's pass to us a package, whether you like it or not. They pass on some good things, but they also pass on some very unwittingly, not that they want to do it, some nasty things in our nature. Sometimes a person may be very good on the surface, but a shadow is hidden behind that is passed into the children. So when we see parents in the dream, that means that shadow or that element has come up to the surface. And we have to change it, not the parents. Parents have gone on the journey. But that element we have to change. Within our nature, it is very active. Some tendency we have inherited from the parents, that is very active. And that we have to change by offering or whatever other means. That offering is the best way. That's what it means. Seeing parents in the dreams. Yes, I understand. So obviously the departed person who has come in the dream, who tells us that, they didn't want to leave us because it's a, untimely and tragic death. It is basically the vital sheath of that person. The person is still not gone beyond the vital worlds, and obviously the person is suffering because of the tragic death and untimely departure. In that case, we have to tell that person. Of course, in a dream we may not be able to, but when we are in our active consciousness woken up, because that being is still trying to come in contact with us. I'm assuming that it's the departed person. Sometimes all kinds of forces can enter into the vital world and can come to us to just hold us back, saying that, I have departed, and, like beggars on the street, sometimes there are forces in the vital world, and I know real examples, and they come to us begging attention and saying, it's been very tragic for me. And that way, these vital forces enter into our consciousness. So one should be very careful. But in any case, what one has to keep sending as messages from the mind, thought communication, without worrying about it, think about that person and say, be at peace. Now you have to go further. Don't look back. You have to go to something more beautiful. You have to go to the divine. You will be resting in the lap of God. What is there to fear and feel sorry about? You will come back in a new body and a beautiful body. So that's how one has to send messages constantly to those who have departed. If they come in the dream and express a tragic sense, one has to tell them, I'm presuming that even if it's not the departed one, but some other forces, we have to tell them to be at peace and to rest in the divine. And that's the way that we have to tell them. I've had such experiences of real, what can be called as ghost and trying to. And I had to tell them, look, why don't you find your peace in God? And I had to pray to Mother that, take him in your fold. It helps tremendously. So, of course, if we are caught up in that sense of tragedy and we start weeping, that means that force has begun to influence us. And since either ways it is harmful. If it is a departed person, then it's like grief compounding grief. His journey is going to be held back. And if it is some other force which is imitating, then it is very dangerous, because when we leave aside the vital sheath, there are always forces in the vital world which are, forces which represent grief, and they'll come in, they take that vital sheath and they can represent an image to us in dreams. So we should be very careful. It's always good to tell the person to go further on the journey and say that, yes, we have missed you, but eventually remember that you have to go to the divine, take on a new body, and carry on with that. So that's how one has to send them off. Okay, James? Thank you so much. Yes.